There is a story that I told myself for years. It went something like, this is just how my life goes. People leave me, things fall apart. I try really hard and then it doesn't work out. And that's just me and how life is. And the thing is, it wasn't even a lie. A lot of that had actually happened. But at some point, I had to ask myself a really uncomfortable question. Was I telling this story because it was true, or was I telling it because I didn't know who I would be without that story? That, in a nutshell, is gate 55. That is what we're working on in this window of time today. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Architap. I want to be upfront. This gene key slash gate is a little bit different from the others. Out of all of the 64 gene keys, this is the only one where the gift and the siddhi have the same name, freedom. It moves from the shadow of victimization to the gift and the siddhi of freedom, which already tells you something. You're not going to be able to bulldoze your way through this one. You can't think your way out of it. The I Ching calls this hexagram the hexagram of abundance. And the Taoists who wrote about it said you had to approach it sideways. We approach things sideways like the Joker, with a little lightness, a little levity, a little humor, and a willingness to stop taking your own suffering quite so seriously. And that's not dismissive. That's the actual teaching that we're getting into. So let's slow this down. 55 sits in the sign of Pisces. It's in the emotional solar plexus in human design. It connects through a channel to the root center, root chakra. It's deeply mystical. It's deeply auditory, meaning that people who carry this gate often feel things before they can name them. They pick up emotional frequency like a radio tower. The environment, other people, the collective field, it all lands in their body first. The I Ching calls it abundance, not the vision board kind of abundance, the kind that comes when illumination and action are finally working together. So when you're clear enough inside to move without forcing it into your actual outer world. And the gene keys call that the way of freedom. The biological anchor here is histidine, an amino acid that most people haven't heard of, but your body knows pretty well. Histidine is essential for tissue repair, immune function, neurological signaling, and protecting against oxidative stress. It's literally the chemistry of staying open and healing when under pressure. When histidine is balanced, the body processes, recovers, and stays regulated. When it's not, you get hypersensitivity, emotional flooding, possibly mood swings that seem like they come out of nowhere, immune dysregulation, digestive issues, which is exactly what the shadow of this gate feels like lived out in a nervous system. The shadow here is victimization. And before you swing at me with like, well, that's not me, stay with it for a second, because this shadow is really sneaky. It doesn't always look like loud, dramatic victimhood. More often, it's a quiet version that's running. It's a low hum under the surface of like, this is just how my life goes. The story running in the background that life is unfair, people always disappoint us, nothing ever really changes, and you've already been hurt too much to expect anything different. The core dilemma of this gate, what Richard Rudd calls the central wound, is external validation, the need to know that we exist. And there's a uncomfortable part that comes along with that, as long as we're suffering, we have an identity, we have a story. I'm going to say that again. As long as we're suffering, We have an identity and we have a story. We have something to point to. If we let go of our suffering, who are we? To the nervous system that's been organized around pain for a long time, that question feels terrifying, which is why freedom can't really be chased. It sort of has to be romanced. It has to be coaxed. You got to be nice to her. You got to approach her sideways. There are 3 layers to this that are worth naming because they stack on top of each other in ways that make this shadow feel very airtight. On the genetic level, what you inherited directly through your bloodline, this gate often carries trauma imprints. Imprints of loss, betrayal, emotional chaos passed down through generations. If you grew up in a home where emotions weren't safe, where adults were really unpredictable or absent or doing their own damage, right? Your nervous system calibrated to that. It became your normal. Then your histidine chemistry started organizing itself around bracing instead of being open. On the epigenetic level, the cultural ancestral level, it shows up as collective victim narratives, family systems, communities, cultures where suffering is worn like a badge, where resilience means that you had to endure some really hard stuff, but you're not actually healing from it. This shadow begins to promote an idea that thriving feels almost like betrayal of the people who didn't get to. Does that make sense when I say that? This idea that we should feel guilty for thriving in our own lives because our past ancestors didn't get a chance. And even though you can consciously know that that's sort of bullshit as I say it, you recognize that a lot of us really do carry this guilt. And then we have this karmic layer, which this gate holds very specifically. 55 eventually asks a question that sounds almost too large. What if you chose this? Not as punishment, but also not as random bad luck, but as the very specific curriculum that your soul needed to learn when it came here to learn it. You don't have to be ready for that question today. It's a big question, but 55 creates the conditions where it starts to become possible to answer this question. So here's what to watch out for. Here's the shadow side. If you're still working through this one, not in theory, but in your real life, like on a regular ass Tuesday, it's going to sound like, quote unquote, this always happens to me. It looks like staying in situations long past the point where they stopped being okay, whether that's a job, a relationship, whatever, because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. It feels like resentment that's been around so long, it just feels like a part of your personality. It shows up as emotional flooding that seems disproportionate to whatever it is that just happened. Or it could also be a kind of numbness where you've just started calling it fine. I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. The repressive version here is quieter. Instead of blaming outward, you turn it inward. Constant low-grade self-criticism, shrinking, apologizing for existing. Still a victim, just a more socially acceptable one that no one will call you out on. And the reactive version spikes outward. It's blame, right? Complaint. The story of how you've been wronged, told and retold until it becomes a load-bearing story. You need to explain why things are the way that they are. Both are the same here. Whether you're fine or you're blaming. Both are the same. Both are the body trying to make meaning out of pain. So here's what to watch out for on the gift side. For those of you who've been doing some of this work, here's what the shift actually looks like, because we don't talk about this enough, and I realized I hadn't been putting it in the last few episodes. So you'll start catching the story before you're fully in it. There's like a half second of recognition. Oh, this is the part where I make myself the victim of the story. It's something that gets you to pause instead of just immediately running the old program. Your emotions are starting to move a little bit more instead of just sticking in place. So you feel something, it passes, and you're not carrying it around 3 days later wondering why you're still upset because you've stopped needing the wound to explain yourself. I'm going to say that again. I think it's very important. You stop needing the wound to explain yourself. Your past then becomes something that happened, not something that writes every future chapter. And the reframe that used to feel like spiritual bypassing, the one about choosing your circumstances, about how your hardest experiences became curriculum rather than punishment, starts to feel less like a coping mechanism and more like it could actually be true. So that is the gift: emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel everything without being ruled by it. So I want to tell a story because all of these build on each other, right? We've been talking about storytelling and the types of stories that we've been telling in various ways for several weeks now. I'm just going to use mine. I grew up in a home with an alcoholic father and a mother who stayed. There was very real damage done and not enough protection from it. And I did what a lot of kids from homes like that do. I carried that pattern forward, even though I remember having specific instances as a kid where I made pacts with myself that I would not do this, right? This is the unfortunate part about self-knowledge, not being able to change the behavior. I stayed in relationships that were absolutely hurting me. I contorted myself into different versions of myself so that I would be lovable. I became an alcoholic myself, and then I created my very own version of the chaos that I grew up inside. And for a long time, my story was something along the lines of, look what was done to me. And that story was true. What happened was real. But staying in that story wasn't keeping me safe anymore. Instead, it was keeping me very trapped. And it wasn't really until I was in my early 30s that I started to see through the lens of the energy work that I now do by learning the EMCS system, learning how thought and feeling and emotion actually work together, like I talked about in that bonus episode. I began to understand that I wasn't a passive receiver of other people's damage, that I had my own system and that that system could update. The story that I tell now sounds different. Not cleaned up, not bypassed, just very different. I chose those parents, not as punishment, but as curriculum. They agreed on some level I'll never fully probably be able to explain in this lifetime to be the very difficult characters in my life so that I could learn what I came here to learn about emotions, about reality, and about what freedom actually really means. So that's not me letting anyone off the hook. That's me taking my story back. That is 55 doing the work that it came here to do. So we can't force a reframe, and you shouldn't really try. What you can do is help your nervous system get loose enough to consider it. Start getting your nervous system to feel safe as often as possible. And it will magically mean that you quit gripping those old stories quite as hard because you have something new and fresh that you're moving towards instead, right? Like your desires can come true because you're no longer a victim of all of this BS. So meet me in part B of 55 for the tapping, and I will see you shortly.